light and airy. Meringue is known for its sweet flavor and the way it melts in your mouth. Bakers and pastry chefs use meringue in a wide array of products, such as fillings and toppings for pies, as shells, or for baked Alaska. Meringue can also be used as a component within other items, like soufflés or buttercream. Using proper techniques while understanding the concepts will ensure that your meringue is perfect every time. Baking and pastry production is a well-established craft that demands both talent and attention to detail. In this video, we'll walk you through making meringues and give you some suggestions on how to put them to use. Chef Dan Budd is an associate professor of baking and pastry.
Meringue is a mixture of egg whites sweetened and stabilized with sugar. A common ratio for these ingredients would be 1 part egg whites and 2 parts sugar. The quality of these ingredients plays a large part in the final meringue. We use grade A large eggs as our standard. When separating the whites, be sure there's no impurities or yolks left in them, or they won't whip up to a good volume. We use standard granulated sugar with no clumps. These same quality standards apply to any ingredients you would add to your meringue. When whipping the egg whites and sugar, we'll refer to the stages as soft, medium, or stiff peak. We'll first start out making meringue by hand, but you might find a machine is better for your production needs. Remember, when you're working with egg whites that are raw, be aware of sanitation regulations, and if you're going to serve a product without further baking, then pasteurized egg whites might be an option. Although meringue is made primarily with 2 ingredients, its preparation and use take many forms. We'll first start out with the common meringue, and we'll show you a few variations. Then we'll make 2 other meringues, the Swiss meringue and Italian meringue. The action of whipping these egg whites is pretty straightforward, although the concept behind the tiny bubbles, the activity of proteins, and the added sugar is pretty involved. We'll talk about this more as we get whipping. Your work area and equipment should be organized and within reach as you prepare your meringue. We'll be using a stainless steel bowl, clean and free of any film or fat residue for our mixing. If you're whipping by hand, a folded side towel can assist you in stabilizing the bowl. Work clean. Impurities will hinder your production and any specks will be extremely noticeable. Again, since you're working with raw eggs, proper handling is a must. Common meringue is the simplest to prepare. Here we have egg whites and sugar. The egg whites have already been separated, and there's many methods to do this. You can choose whichever you're comfortable with, as long as the final result is some clean, fresh egg whites without any yolks floating in there. You can make a meringue using a mixing machine. It makes it a little bit easier. We're going to start out by hand because this brings us a little bit closer to the meringue and to understanding the process. What's most important is that when we begin whipping, we see the egg whites rising before we put any sugar in. And we can see the bubbles start to form and see the egg whites lifting. If they weren't lifting and they were staying low and almost syrupy or watery, it might be that there was a little bit of oil in the bowl or a yolk in there that you didn't notice. Also, egg whites will whip up more readily if they're at room temperature. We see some large bubbles forming in the beginning, and then as the meringue comes up higher, these bubbles will start to break up into smaller bubbles, and the meringue will get an opaque look and a white foamy appearance. Now that I can see that the meringue's rising, I'm going to rest my bowl down, stabilized by the towel here, and start to sprinkle in some of the sugar. A slow, steady stream into the whites. I even like to hold the sugar up really high so that the sugar can really float down and I can watch it falling into the meringue rather than falling in a large clump. It's important to continually whisk, moving the egg whites and the sugar together so the sugar dissolves in the moisture. I want to go steady because if a lot of air forms, then the air traps the moisture and the moisture is not available to dissolve the sugar. So I'm going to keep going steadily into the meringue as I'm whipping.
Egg whites are 90% water and 10% protein. A closer look at the developing meringue reveals the sugar coating the air pockets, keeping them from popping. The agitation of whipping breaks the proteins and water into smaller and smaller globules while incorporating air. Both moisture and agitation dissolve the sugar, which in turn surrounds, separates, and holds the small air pocket stable in this aqueous phase.
Okay, at this point all the sugar's in. I'm going to tilt the bowl a little bit and lift the egg whites as I whip. This way, stirring like this can sometimes even force the air out if I'm pushing against the bowl. But by lifting, with this kind of turning lifting motion, I can get a little bit more volume and a little bit more air into the egg whites. Now if we were making a souffle, we might want to have a meringue that has what we would call a soft peak, meaning that it's not whipped fully and it still has some volume or air that it could take on, or the proteins in the egg whites could actually expand. Now you can really see the glossiness I was talking about. There's no real evidence of a dryness or a separated look. It looks very shiny from the melted sugar in the egg whites. I can tell you this definitely gives a workout to your arm. Now we're getting to what we call the soft peak stage. By the way, a soft peak meringue might be a good meringue that you would use to fold into a souffle. Being soft means that it still has room to expand, just like you would like it to do when it's baking inside a souffle. You can tell by lifting the whip up and seeing how the meringue peaks. It's a little bit easier if we take a little bit of meringue out of the bowl and then lift it. We can see that it peaks up and then slowly kind of falls over. So this is what we'd call a soft peak meringue. And now we've come to what we'd call a medium peak. If I lift a little meringue out of the bowl here, you can see even more volume comes up onto the spoon. It's not as soft as the soft peak. And when I lift up here, we can see the meringue peak up a little stronger and tip over just a little bit. It's not really a stiff peak yet, but we would call this one a medium peak meringue. A medium peak meringue might be good for folding into a cake batter. And this way, it would have some room to expand, but also the cake batter usually has some flour in the recipe that would help to stabilize the volume too. Now we're getting to a stiff peak meringue. The meringue has reached its maximum volume, and all this air in here has stiffened the meringue, firmed it up. If I take a little bit of this meringue up on the spoon, you can see how you can even cut into the meringue, and the shape of the spoon is showing in the meringue. I can take a little bit, and it's even hard to lift because it's so stiff, but as soon as you do, it holds its peak directly. This is a meringue which is going to be good for decorating a dessert, piping on baked Alaska, piping on top of a pie, which would then have further baking. It's important that we remember this common meringue is not baked. There's actually raw egg whites and sugar here, and so whatever application we're going to use it for, it's going to be in a baked application or somewhere it's going to be cooked to be pasteurized. To really appreciate the crispness of a firm meringue, we'll take a little bit here and pipe it with a star tip. That way you can really see what the rosette of a meringue looks like. So we can see with a firm meringue how distinct it comes out, exactly the shape of the piping tip. It's not drooping or sagging. We could dry these in the oven at a low temperature, and we could serve them simply with some fresh berries and cream or a berry sauce, and it would be a nice crunchy complement to a simple, very simple dessert. If you're unable to get the volume that you want from your meringue, here's a few tips that might help you. First of all, make sure that your equipment and your bowl are very clean. A little lemon juice or vinegar is sometimes used to wipe the bowl clean. This acid can also help to relax the proteins in the egg whites for more consistent meringue. Make sure your egg whites are clean. If there's any little goldfish, or in other words, some small specks of egg yolk floating in there, they'll inhibit the egg whites from rising up. Another thing to watch for is over whipping the meringue. In some cases where it'll be baked in a cake and folded in, you need to make sure that you don't over whip the meringue and bring it to a point which we would call dry, where the meringue would actually lose its gloss. And finally, if you add your sugar too soon before you get volume in a common meringue, this sugar will become a syrup with the moisture in the whites and inhibit the meringue from lifting up. I'd like to show you a simple variation with the common meringue. This time we're going to replace some of the granulated sugar with confectioner's sugar and sift it together with almond flour. We'll fold it into the meringue and then pipe it out into a layer which we can bake and call a japonaise. And we're going to look for a medium, even between a medium and stiff peak meringue. And Amber has kindly sifted the almond flour and confectioner sugar together, and she's going to sift that in while I fold. And the folding action is also important here. We're not being abusive to the meringue. We're lifting up instead of stirring and squashing the air out of the meringue. We're trying to keep the volume in it as we slowly sift in the dry ingredients. And this would be the common technique for many sponge cakes or aerated products. Thank you, Amber. We get everything folded in. And starting in the center, we drew some circles here to use as a guide. We'll pipe this around in concentric circles to make a layer that will bake. There'll be a little bit of golden color on top, but generally it'll be crispy on the outside and a little bit soft on the inside. Come right to the outside edge there, and we'll close it off. This is ready to bake in about a 300 to 325 degree oven. A nice golden color on the outside and a little crispness, a little soft on the inside. We'll let them cool and they'll come off the paper, and we can make a nice cake with a buttercream or mousseline filling. For a variation on the ingredients in the common meringue, some chefs use lemon juice, vinegar, or cream of tartar. This acid will help to stabilize the meringue and give a more consistent product. Just a caution, don't use cream of tartar in a copper bowl. They're a toxic combination. Also, it's important to remember that this is an unpasteurized product, so the common meringue will need to be further cooked or dried. Now let's use a new technique to make a meringue. We'll make a Swiss meringue. With this meringue, the common formula is still the same. We have egg whites and sugar, but we're going to use a double boiler here to warm the egg whites and sugar together. It's important that the water isn't boiling really strong. There's a hot steam under here, and that will help to heat the egg whites and sugar. I'll pour them right into the bowl here. In this meringue, we can actually put the sugar in all at once. We don't have to worry about it. It's going to melt into the egg whites with the heat of the steam. Just going to whisk this together. But it's also important here not to whisk this too much. We're not trying to whip it up right now. And if we put too much air into it by whipping it, we'll actually make the atmosphere dry and it won't allow the sugar to dissolve. So we just want to get it mixed together, kind of stir it together a little bit, and allow the heat to affect the egg whites and help the sugar to dissolve. This is one meringue that we can actually warm it up enough here to pasteurize the whites, where we could use it in some type of dessert where it wouldn't need any further cooking. It could be used to decorate a dessert. It also is a type of meringue that we could use to pipe decorations that would be dried in the oven. We're going to watch the temperature rise, and classically the temperature of 110 to 120 degrees would be a good temperature to whip up the meringue for a consistency of medium or stiff peak, even a soft peak. The pot should have enough water to last the length of the cooking process, but not so much that it's in contact with the bottom of the bowl. It's also important that you're not going to whisk this meringue or whip it up too much in the bowl. We just want to stir it together and let the sugar and the egg whites dissolve together. The classic Swiss meringue is brought up to a temperature of 110 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and we've reached that temperature. So we're going to move this right over to the machine to start whipping. And we can bring this right up to a rapid, high speed, because that's going to start to cool the whites and bring them up in volume.
In this model, the increase of coated air pockets indicates a more stable meringue. With the addition of heat to the technique, the sugar will more readily dissolve and surround the air pockets.
Now we have the machine at full speed, and we're going to watch the meringue carefully to bring it to the desired peak. Another option for a Swiss meringue that's going to be dried is to flavor it. The flavoring could be vanilla bean seeds or fine chopped citrus zests, and they could be added into the warming step with the egg whites and sugar. Now let's make the most demanding of the three meringues, the Italian meringue. In this meringue we're going to cook the sugar and add it to the whipping whites. It's really crucial that we have everything ready so that we're ready for the timing of this meringue. First, we're going to take the water and add it to the pot here. The water for cooking the sugar is actually about 1/3 the weight of the sugar. In this recipe, we also have divided the sugar into 2 portions. One portion we'll use to cook, and the other portion we'll save to put into the egg whites, just like the common meringue, to help stabilize the egg whites while the sugar is cooking. The sugar can go directly in on top of the water. And to help with the sugar cooking process, we're going to put a little lemon juice, just a couple of drops. This is going to help the sugar from recrystallizing as it cooks and keep it nice and smooth. I'm just going to give it a little stir just to help the sugar and the water dissolve together, but we're not going to want to agitate this too much in the cooking process. Now, as the sugar's cooking, it's really important to wash down the sides. I have a little cold water on the brush here, and as I see little crystals of sugar on the sides of the pot, I'll just wash and brush them down. Don't put the brush into the sugar itself, just let the water from the brush melt the sugar crystals and they'll flow back down into the pot. Eventually, if they do stay on the sides of the pot, they may recrystallize the whole pot of sugar, which wouldn't be good for your meringue. We're also going to monitor the temperature of this sugar very closely. As it's cooking, we're going to start whipping the egg whites so that they both come ready at the same time. We're ultimately going to go to 248 degrees, and about 235 degrees we'll start our egg whites whipping. Okay, we're watching our sugar carefully. Now we're going to get our egg whites in the bowl. As soon as the sugar reaches 235 degrees, we're going to start whipping our egg whites. And we're there. Remember, we have 1/4 of the sugar left. We're going to use that in these egg whites to help stabilize them while they're waiting for the sugar to come in. It's still important to wait and not add this sugar too soon, just like in the common meringue. We're going to allow the egg whites to rise up first, and then we'll slowly add this sugar in. This is why the Italian meringue is very demanding. We have to watch the sugar and the egg whites at the same time. Okay, the egg whites are rising up, and I'll steadily sprinkle the sugar in. Now the egg whites have some time to get a little volume. The sugar that's in there is going to melt a little bit and hold them stable while we're waiting for our cooking sugar, which is going to be at 248 degrees very soon. Be careful when working with this cooking sugar. It's very hot and it's dangerous. You should have everything ready. You should be steady with your hand. Okay, our hot sugar is ready. Now when we're pouring it into the egg whites, we want to make sure that we're not going to hit the whip or the side of the bowl too much. We want to get right down in between and have the hot sugar hitting right into the egg whites. Nice steady stream. We also don't want to go too slow. If we go too slow, the sugar will cool off. We want it to actually heat the eggs. You can even see the egg whites steaming from the hot sugar going in. We can still watch this meringue and stop if we want to save it at a soft peak, or we can go further on to get a medium peak or a stiff peak meringue. If you feel the meringue's ready and you want to hold it for a little while, you can slow the machine down to the slowest speed and just keep it moving slowly, and that'll stabilize the meringue at a certain point, although this can't be done for too long.
In this final example, the fully dissolved sugar coats the air pockets, creating the most stable meringue. Here, there are no granules of sugar. The full amount of sugar is used to surround the air pockets.
Okay, our meringue now is at a soft peak. You can see here it's really soft. It also still has that nice glossy shine that we saw in our common meringue and in our Swiss meringues. You can't smell it, but I can. The Italian meringue really has a nice smell, almost like a cotton candy type smell, where the sugar really cooked into the egg whites. You might want to use this in a recipe and fold it in. In that case, you might want to keep it soft like this. It'll retain some of the volume and make a nice smooth creamy mousse. Or we can continue to whip this further. Now let's use some of our meringue to make a plated dessert. I'm just going to take some of our Swiss meringue and pipe it into the shape of a little flower here on the plate. Remember, this meringue is cooked, so it's safe to serve like this. And we'll pipe this meringue, make a little flower here. And now one of the things about meringue that's so beautiful is you can glaze it with some heat, either under a broiler or with a torch like this. You get a really beautiful color, and caramel also tastes nice. Remember, meringue is made with egg whites and sugar, so it is rather sweet. With this dessert, I'm going to use just some unsweetened whipped cream and some fresh berries, which have a tart flavor. Some fresh raspberries here, and we have some fresh blackberries. And that will help to balance out the sweetness of the meringue. And these are just the meringue discs that we made earlier. We dried them in the oven. We also made some small shapes, which we were calling mushrooms. I drilled some holes in the bottom of these caps with a paring knife. A nice little hole, and then that cap will turn over and sit right on top of the stems that we piped. Take a little cocoa powder, tap over that. Get a nice little simple mushroom effect. Take these mushrooms now and we'll just use them as a little garnish on our plate. It's almost like we have a meringue garden. And also some meringue that was spread out and piped into a little butterfly shape. The little meringue butterfly landed right on top of the dessert. With a well-made meringue, you can make simple and beautiful desserts.